The laughter in the private booth was a thick, cloying smoke and I was suffocating in it. I sat curled into the plush velvet, a ghost at my own funeral, while the people who were supposed to be my fiancé's closest friends dissected my relationship with the clinical detachment of vultures. Liam, what's with the love bite on your neck? Ben, a man I'd known since Liam and I started dating, pointed a sloshing glass of whiskey at Liam's throat. I heard Isabel came back yesterday. You were the one who picked her up from the airport, right? Don't tell me you too. A chorus of disbelieving guffaws erupted. No way. Isn't Liam the one who claims to be allergic to women? Another Mark chimed in. Yeah. He dated Elena for 3 years and Elena still hasn't even had her first kiss. That's kind of hilarious if you think about it. The ice in my own glass had long since melted, diluting the expensive scotch into a pathetic watery imitation of courage. My fingers were numb where they clutched the crystal. You guys just don't get it, Ben said, leaning forward conspiratorially. How could Elena possibly compare to Isabel Vance? Isabel was Liam's first love, his unforgettable white moonlight. If she hadn't chosen to follow her brother abroad back then, Elena never would have had the chance to be with him. The words were like a bucket of ice water thrown directly into my soul. It was a truth I had always sensed, a shadow that had dogged my steps for 3 years. But to hear it spoken so casually, so publicly, felt like a physical violation. Every drop of blood in my body seemed to freeze solid. And that's when I saw it. On Liam's pale, elegant neck, just above the collar of his black shirt, was a stark, dark purple mark. A hickey. Clear and harsh against his cold, white skin, a brand of betrayal. He listened to their teasing with that familiar, indifferent expression, a slight, almost imperceptible curve to his lips. He didn't deny any of it. A sharp, prickling ache shot through my heart, so intense I had to press a hand to my chest to make sure it wasn't bleeding. I stared at that mark, a monument to my own naivety, unable to look away. 3 years. 3 years of my life poured into this man, and it had all boiled down to this single vulgar blemish. All right, enough chatter, Mark announced, his eyes flicking towards the door. Isabel's here. The door to the private room swung open, and she entered as if on a celestial current. Isabel Vance. She was wearing a simple black fitted spaghetti strap dress that clung to her tall willowy frame like a second skin. Her hair, a cascade of rich chestnut waves, framed a face that was both strikingly beautiful and hauntingly familiar. She was even more stunning than in the photos I'd secretly pored over in moments of weakness. Long time no see, she said, her voice a melody that instantly silenced the room. Her smile was radiant, practiced, and utterly captivating. Amidst the whistles and cheers, Liam stood up. He reached his hand out toward her, a gesture I had yearned for in countless crowded rooms but had never received. She placed her hand in his as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and with that fluid motion, settled herself right beside him on the central couch. He fit. Compared to me, perched on the outskirts like an afterthought, she looked far more like Liam's official partner, his rightful counterpart. You're more beautiful than ever, Isabel, Ben gushed. Did you come back to patch things up with Liam this time? She let out a light, tinkling laugh. Don't be ridiculous. I heard Liam already has a girlfriend here. Don't even bring that up, Mark scoffed, waving a dismissive hand in my general direction. You know better than anyone. Liam has issues with physical contact, especially with women. That girlfriend of his, they've been together for 3 years and haven't even kissed. Don't even mention anything beyond that. But the moment you return, here you are all flirty again. A delicate flush rose on Isabel's cheeks. She glanced sideways at Liam, a playful, intimate look. Why'd you tell them? Liam smiled faintly, a real smile, one that reached his eyes and transformed his usually stoic face. I didn't say anything. Wait, is that true? Isabel looked half amused, half surprised, her gaze flicking between Liam and the mark on his neck. You two really? Liam didn't respond. Instead, his eyes, those cool gray depths I had once gotten lost in, swept over to me. They held no warmth, no apology, only a distant, indifferent curiosity, as if he were observing a mildly interesting specimen under a glass. My face went pale, my hands trembling so violently I couldn't even hold my wine glass steady. The amber liquid sloshed over the rim, splashing onto the pale silk of my dress, leaving a dark, spreading stain. Isabel covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking as she collapsed against Liam's shoulder, laughing so hard her body trembled. "You're too much," she managed to gasp between giggles, her eyes glistening with mirth as she looked at me. "Look at her. She looks absolutely pitiful now." That was the moment the last thread of my composure snapped. I stood up, my movements slow and deliberate, and slowly wiped the wet spot on my dress with a napkin. Liam watched me coldly from his throne beside his muse. In that agonizing pause, as their laughter echoed in my ears, the searing pain in my chest slowly began to turn to numbness. And in that numbness, a terrible crystalline clarity began to set in. What I owed Liam I had already paid back in full. 3 years ago, Liam had shielded my face during a horrific car crash. A shard of glass from the shattered windshield had speared through his right hand. He was born to be an artist, a prodigy famous from his teenage years. But after the accident, the doctor said he might never hold a brush with the same precision again. His world, built on the sensitivity of his fingertips, had collapsed. During his most hopeless, rage-filled days, his penthouse apartment had been a wasteland of empty liquor bottles and torn canvases. Anyone who dared to visit, friends, family, colleagues, was met with screamed obscenities and thrown objects. It was during that cataclysmic period that Isabel, the love of his life, had left him. She couldn't handle the broken version of the genius she had adored. I, on the other hand, was racked with a guilt so profound it was a physical weight on my lungs. I was the reason we were in that car. I was the reason his hand was injured. I had only wanted to find a way, any way, to make it up to him. I remembered finding him sitting on the messy floor of his studio, his hands and clothes splattered with paint that he could no longer use to create. His face was still breathtakingly handsome, a marble statue of a fallen angel, but his eyes were so dark they seemed completely shut off from any light. When I had finally gathered the courage to ask, my voice a mere whisper, "How can I make this up to you?" he had lifted his head. The look he gave me was devoid of any humanity. He raised the corners of his lips in a mockery of a smile and said, "I've got everything I need except a woman. Be that." In the 3 years that followed, I became that. He refused all medical follow-ups, all therapy. I was the one who spent nights researching, who encouraged him to try painting with his left hand, who bought the first set of left-handed brushes. Bit by painful bit, I stood by him as he rebuilt his confidence from the ashes. Through relentless, obsessive practice, his left-hand technique became even more refined, more emotionally raw than anything he'd ever done with his right. His new works were more breathtaking, more sought after than before. Liam became increasingly dependent on me. Even though his psychological block prevented him from touching me, from kissing me, he insisted I remain within his line of sight whenever he painted. He needed my presence like he needed oxygen. I understood his trauma, his past with Isabel, and I never forced him to be close to me. I convinced myself that his need for me was a form of love. There were several times, in the quiet of his studio, when he would cup the back of my head, his eyes fixed on my lips, inching closer and closer. His gaze would be full of a longing so intense it stole my breath, a silent battle raging within him. But every single time he would stop a hair's breadth away, his entire body tensing before he pulled back, a look of self-loathing flashing across his face. The more he did that, the more it stirred something restless and desperate inside me. I mistook his internal struggle for passion, for a deep, complicated love that was just too profound to be expressed physically. As Liam's name began to blaze across the art world once more, a whispered piece of news found its way to him. Isabel Vance was returning to the country. And now, seeing the hickey on his neck, seeing the way he let her drink from his glass, the way he smiled at her, the final delusional veil was ripped from my eyes. It turned out he wasn't unwilling to have physical intimacy with women. It was just that the woman wasn't me. The woman had to be Isabel. I composed myself, the numbness solidifying into a cold, hard resolve. I picked up my purse from the seat beside me, my fingers not trembling anymore. I pulled out the keys to Liam's penthouse, the place I had called home for 3 years, and set them down on the glass table in front of him with a definitive clink. "Oh wow," Ben teased, his eyes alight with schadenfreude. "Our soft and gentle little Elena is finally putting her foot down." Liam's brow furrowed, his indifferent mask cracking for the first time that night. "What are you doing?" I threw the used, wine-stained napkin into a nearby trash bin. I looked him directly in the eyes, my voice steady and clear. "Liam, you know I'm a clean freak. I told you before. Once something's been used by someone else, I won't even look at it again. For a moment his face darkened, a storm gathering in his gray eyes. He stared at me, silent and seething. I'm sorry, Isabel said, standing up with a perfectly practiced look of guilt on her face. We were both drunk last night. I only found out today that he has a girlfriend. If I'd known, I wouldn't have said so much to him. Liam's expression returned to its usual, infuriating calm. He looked from her to me, his words slow and deliberate, designed to inflict maximum damage. Well, now that you're back, it doesn't matter whether I have a girlfriend or not. He looked me in the eyes, a cruel twist to his mouth. It's not like I ever actually liked her anyway. But those words, which would have shattered me just an hour ago, now landed with the force of feathers. They no longer had any power over the hollowed-out space where my heart used to be. I smiled, a faint, cold smile that didn't reach my eyes. Liam's gaze sharpened, unnerved by my reaction. As I turned and walked towards the door to leave the private room, I overheard one of his other friends whisper, "Wait, Elena's just leaving like that? She used to be infamous for being clingy. Nothing could get her to let go." "I think she just realized she'll never win against Isabel," someone replied. "She's finally backing off." Their voices faded behind me as I stepped out into the corridor. It wasn't until the elevator doors slid shut, enclosing me in the sterile, silent box, that I finally exhaled, a deep, shuddering breath I felt I'd been holding for 3 years. I had poured every ounce of my love, my soul, into the past 1,095 days, and it had brought me nothing but this profound, soul-crushing heartache. A faint, ragged sound of breathing drifted into my awareness, snapping me out of my thoughts. I blinked, my vision clearing, and that's when I noticed the man standing in the opposite corner of the elevator. His name was Adrian Wolfe. And he was in obvious, serious distress. Adrian Wolfe was leaning heavily against the elevator wall, one hand braced against the polished metal as if to keep the world from tilting. His face was flushed, his forehead beaded with a fine sheen of sweat that caught the harsh fluorescent light. His breathing was a ragged, uneven thing, each inhale a visible effort. My own misery momentarily forgotten, a jolt of alarm went through me. Instinct, honed from years of caregiving, urged me to step forward and help. But something about his condition made me pause. This wasn't the labored breathing of illness or a panic attack. It was something else, something more primal and volatile. His knuckles were white where he gripped the wall, his body coiled with a tense, suppressed energy that felt dangerous. He turned his head and his eyes met mine. They were a startling shade of green, clouded now with pain and something darker, more frantic. "Do me a favor," he ground out, his voice husky and strained. "Help me get to the parking garage." I hesitated, a war waging inside me. The last thing I needed was to get entangled with another complicated man, especially one who looked like he was either going to pass out or tear the elevator apart with his bare hands. But seeing the tight clench of his jaw, the way his brows were furrowed in sheer discomfort, the part of me that couldn't ignore someone and need one out, I gave a tight, quick nod. "Okay." I moved cautiously, slipping under his arm and letting its weight settle across my shoulders. He was solid, much more so than he looked, and the heat radiating from his body was intense like a furnace. When the elevator chimed and the doors slid open to the basement level, I half walked, half dragged him out into the cool, dim vastness of the parking garage. His skin was burning hot through his shirt. Even his breath as it ghosted past my ear felt scalding. "Where's your car parked?" I asked, my voice unnaturally loud in the concrete silence. He muttered a location, a row and number, his words slurred. The humid warmth of his breath brushed against the side of my neck and my bare shoulder, and a violent shiver of discomfort racked my frame. I just wanted to get him into his car and leave, to retreat back into the numb shell of my own heartbreak. Just then, the familiar sound of the elevator doors opening again made my blood run cold. Liam and his group stepped out, their laughter and chatter echoing through the garage. On pure, panicked instinct, I pulled Adrian behind a wide, concrete structural column, pressing us both into the shadows. The sudden movement was too much for his drugged, unsteady body. He let out a low groan, his legs giving way, and collapsed weakly against me. His full weight pinned me against the cold concrete, his face buried in the crook of my neck. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Wait a second, Liam. Look over there." It was Ben's voice, dripping with salacious curiosity. "Isn't that Adrian Wolf from the Wolf family? And it looks like he's on top of a woman." "No way. Seriously, that desperate? Hooking up right in the parking lot. Should we go take a look?" My entire body went rigid. It wasn't that I still cared what Liam thought. In that moment I truly knew I didn't. It was the sheer, unbelievable awkwardness of the situation. To be caught like this minutes after my dramatic exit with a man like Adrian Wolf. It was a nightmare. And Adrian, clearly not satisfied with the level of chaos, chose that moment to lean down further, his lips nearly touching my ear. His breath was a brand. "What do you think Liam would do?" he whispered, his voice a rough, seductive scrape. "If he saw this?" I shot him a fierce glare, but in the dark I doubted he could see it. His fingers, which had been resting limply on my back, slid to my waist, creeping slowly upward with a deliberate, terrifying slowness. "He normally won't even let other guys brush against your sleeve," Adrian murmured, his words a toxic, knowing poison. "If he saw me touching you like this, he'd probably lose it." The footsteps were getting closer. I panicked, my scalp prickling with 1,000 pinpricks of pure adrenaline. I quickly shoved his hand away, my own hands trembling. Adrian's eyes, when they met mine in the gloom, shimmered with a faint, unnerving glint. "He looked pretty heartbroken back there in the elevator," he whispered. "I'm guessing you and Liam broke up." "So what if we did?" I whispered back, the words tasting like ash. But he suddenly laughed, a soft, breathy sound that was entirely at odds with his condition. His eyes, lit with a fiery, watery glow, held a strange triumph. Just then Liam's cold, authoritative voice cut through the tension from a few yards away. "Forget it. Isabel and I have something to deal with. Let's go." The footsteps receded, followed by the sound of car doors slamming and engines starting. I held my breath until the last echo of their presence faded away, leaving only the hum of the garage's ventilation system. Once they were gone, the fight seemed to go out of Adrian. He finally let go of me, pushing himself upright with visible effort. I stumbled back a few paces, putting a safe distance between us, my irritation flaring. "You look perfectly fine to me," I snapped, straightening my ruined dress. "Didn't seem like you needed help at all." "I was drugged," he said simply, leaning his head back against the column and closing his eyes. He let out a slow, controlled breath. "Drugged." The word sent a fresh wave of shock through me. "A businesswoman from Hong Kong," he explained, his voice regaining a sliver of its usual composure. "She got pissed after I turned her down a few times and slipped something into my drink." He opened his eyes, and his gaze, though still heavy-lidded, was calm and held a flicker of dark amusement. "Relax. I'm not like Liam. Even drugged, I can still control myself." I gritted my teeth, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "Then what was all that just now? Leaning so close." "I slipped up for a second," he said, not sounding the least bit apologetic. I glared at him, but what really stunned me into silence was the implication of what he'd said earlier. "So, you already knew about Liam and Isabel?" The question left my lips before I could stop it. Meaning I was the last one to find out. "Someone I know told me earlier tonight they saw the two of them checking into a hotel." He watched me carefully, his green eyes missing nothing. "With your personality, I figured you wouldn't just let that slide." I lowered my head, the cold concrete of the pillar seeping into my back. It took me a while to find my voice, the words small and broken. It was 3 years. Even if it had started from guilt, those countless days and nights we spent side by side, the joys, the heartbreaks, we'd shared so much that it had nearly fooled me into believing we were in love. I looked up at him, my vision blurring. Being betrayed when you've given your heart, it hurts more than anyone can imagine. Adrian was silent for a moment. Then he gently reached out and patted my head, an awkward, almost brotherly gesture. "All right, don't be sad," he said softly. "If you start crying now, people might think I bullied you." The second he said that, with a kindness I hadn't expected from him, the dam finally broke. A hot pressure built behind my eyes, and my nose stung with the effort of holding back the tears. In a hoarse, watery voice I asked, "Do you have a tissue?" Adrian paused, then patted his pockets, pulling out a crisp white handkerchief and handing it to me. "If only the timing weren't so wrong," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "If only the place weren't so wrong." My eyes, blurred with tears, lifted to look at him. "Huh." My voice trembled from both the heavy nasal tone and the swell of emotions I could no longer suppress. His throat bobbed slightly. He covered his eyes with his hand, letting out a frustrated sigh. Damn that stupid drug. Suddenly I understood what he meant. A flush of embarrassment heated my own cheeks. I took a step back, clutching the handkerchief. Do you want me to take you to the hospital? He chuckled, a low, rough sound. Idiot. I'll be fine after a little rest. He looked at me, a wry smile touching his lips. Or you could just say something random to distract me. Okay. I wiped my eyes, trying to compose myself. What did you have for dinner? He looked utterly speechless. Something useful, please. All right then. I took a shaky breath, grasping for a memory, any memory that wasn't about Liam. What was the first thing you did after your vision came back 3 years ago? His expression shifted instantly. The pain and the effects of the drug seemed to recede, replaced by an unexpected, penetrating seriousness. He looked directly at me, his green eyes clear and focused. I looked for you, he said, his voice low and steady. I wanted to see what you looked like. I froze, completely caught off guard by his answer. 3 years ago, Adrian Wolfe had lost his vision in a car accident. I was the caregiver his family hired to look after him. For 6 months, I was his eyes, his guide, his reluctant companion in a world of darkness. Were you disappointed? I asked, giving a small, awkward smile, trying to lighten the sudden intensity of the moment. Not really, he shook his head. It's not like I expected you to be stunning or anything, but when I finally saw you, you exceeded my expectations. I couldn't quite tell if that was supposed to be a compliment or an insult. I reached up and self-consciously touched my face. I'll take that as a compliment, I suppose. To be fair, you were pretty grumpy when we first met. Treated me pretty roughly too. He gave a slight, acknowledging tilt of his head. I guess I get it now, I continued. Anyone would have a hard time accepting something like that, suddenly losing their sight. I gave him a gentle, understanding smile, the first real one all night. So, when your vision came back, I was genuinely happy for you. He looked at me for a long, silent moment, a softness I hadn't seen before gradually surfacing in his eyes. Yeah, he said quietly. The first time I saw you, you were smiling at me just like that. I murmured a soft, non-committal sound, but the moment was shifting again. The memory was a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. Not long after that, Adrian said, his voice flattening, you handed me your resignation letter. He paused and the air grew thick. Said you had to go take care of your boyfriend who was injured in a car accident. The way he said boyfriend was laced with quiet contempt. That kind of guy, he stated, his gaze sharpening, could actually be your boyfriend. His words landed with the force of a revelation. All my life, people had said I wasn't good enough for Liam Miller. It was the first time someone had ever turned that notion on its head and questioned whether Liam was even worthy of me. The spell was broken by the sound of a car alarm beeping as it was unlocked. Since you two have broken up now, Adrian continued, pushing himself off the column, his composure mostly restored, I guess there's no need to run around doing things for him anymore. He paused, then looked at me all business. Are you interested in working at my gallery as a curator? I've always trusted your sense of aesthetics. My breath hitched. A job. I desperately needed a job. You've worked with Liam for years. You know my feelings. I've never hidden them from you. Adrian leaned against the structural column and tilted his head as he looked at me. But this offer isn't just about personal feelings. I genuinely believe in your ability. 6 months ago, my mother had passed away after a long, brutal illness with a brain tumor. The medical bills had been astronomical, a mountain of debt that my salary as Liam's assistant manager could never hope to conquer. It was Adrian, through connections I never asked about, who had helped me contact one of the few surgeons in the country capable of the high-risk operation. From pre-op prep to her post-op recovery, he had handled details I was too panicked and grief-stricken to manage. I owed him more favors than I could ever repay. And now, with the finality of the breakup, I was also cut off from the generous commissions Liam gave me from his painting sales. The payment reminders were already piling up on my phone. After a moment of internal struggle, I met his gaze. I'll think about it, I said, my voice stronger than before. A slow smile spread across his face. Good. He led me to his car, a sleek, dark sedan that looked as composed and powerful as its owner pretended to be. As he opened the passenger door for me, I took one last look back at the shadowy garage, at the pillar where my old life had officially crumbled. The pain was still there, a deep, throbbing ache, but it was no longer the only thing I could feel. There was something else now, a flicker of something that felt suspiciously like the beginning of a very different, very uncertain future. A week later, I emailed Adrian formally accepting his offer. The debt collectors weren't going to wait for my heart to finish breaking. The gallery, named Viridian Perspectives, was a stunning airy space in the city's arts district. All polished concrete floors, exposed brick and strategically placed skylights that bathed everything in a clean, honest light. It was the antithesis of Liam's brooding, paint-splattered studio. My title was Associate Curator. For the first few days, I moved through the space like a ghost, hyper-aware of being the ex of Adrian's rival, the pitiful woman Liam Miller had discarded. But the work itself was a bomb. It was structured, professional. I wasn't fetching coffee or soothing a volatile artist's ego. I was analyzing loan agreements, drafting condition reports, and planning sightlines for upcoming exhibitions. I was using the knowledge I'd absorbed over 3 years of managing Liam's career, but for myself. As the workday was winding down one Friday, Adrian walked over and tapped on my desk. "Well," he said, a faint smile playing on his lips, "I've helped you out quite a bit, haven't I? How about buying me dinner?" He wasn't wrong. The job was one thing, but the favor with my mother's surgery was a debt that could never be fully repaid. A year ago, when the doctor had said the tumor was inoperable, it was Adrian who had quietly made a few calls. He found the one neurosurgeon in the country who specialized in such deep-seated tumors and got her on the schedule. He'd handled the logistics when I was too paralyzed by fear and grief to function. I'd never properly thanked him, not really. The chaos with Liam had always gotten in the way. "You're right," I said, returning his smile. It felt strange on my face, like using a muscle that had atrophied. "I should properly thank you. You picked the place." Adrian's grin widened. "Deal." He took me to a stylish music restaurant, the kind with low lighting, intimate booths, and a live jazz band playing something soft and melancholic. It was a world away from the loud, ostentatious bars Liam and his friends favored. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something akin to peace. What I didn't expect, with a predictability that felt like a cosmic joke, was to run into Liam and Isabel there. They were seated at a prime central table holding court. Isabel was laughing at something, her head thrown back, and Liam's arm was draped casually over the back of her chair. My body went rigid the moment I saw them. Wow. Couldn't even wait a few days before showing up to mark her territory. One of Liam's hangers-on, a guy named Chris, said loudly enough for us to hear. Liam was right. She couldn't hold back. He's the best she'll ever do. She's made a fortune just from the commission off his paintings. What woman would walk away from that? Liam lounged back in his chair, staring straight at me, his smile faint and utterly unreadable. Hearing them talk so openly as if I were a gold digger who'd hit the jackpot made my skin crawl. The old me would have flushed with shame, would have wanted to disappear. Now the shame was quickly being burned away by a slow, simmering anger. Adrian had gone to park the car, but now he returned and gently draped an arm over my shoulder. "What's wrong?" he asked in a soft voice, his gaze immediately finding Liam's table. He understood in an instant. "I just couldn't find the table," I replied quickly, my heart thumping against my ribs. He guided me forward, his presence a solid, calming wall beside me. "It's this way." Liam really had given me a lot of financial support. I'd taken care of his chaotic life, handled his gallery contacts, and organized his exhibitions. Every time he sold a painting, he gave me a percentage. At first, I hadn't even wanted to take the money. My parents had left behind a mountain of debt, and I needed to keep working multiple tutoring jobs just to keep the collectors at bay. That meant I didn't have much time left to spend with Liam. After a while, he grew increasingly dissatisfied. "You have time to run around earning a few measly bucks," he'd said to me once, his voice cold as ice, "but not enough time to stay by my side and be my assistant. I've told you I can't paint when you're not around, and the money I give you is way more than you'd make tutoring outside." Over the course of 3 years, the crushing debt on my back eased considerably. I was grateful to him, but maybe in Liam's heart he had always believed I only ever helped him pick up the brush again because of the money. He'd twisted my necessity into a character flaw. The waiter led us to our table, and Adrian, with an old-world courtesy Liam would have sneered at, pulled out my chair. Unfortunately, our table happened to be right next to theirs. Just as the server placed our menus down and turned to leave, I saw Isabel pick up the wine glass in front of Liam and take a sip. He smiled at her, a genuine, easy smile, probably saying something like, "The wine's good." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Liam had severe OCD. He hated anyone touching his personal belongings. He would never, under any circumstance, share utensils or a glass with someone else. I remembered the time I, parched and distracted, had accidentally taken a sip from his water glass. His face had turned to stone in an instant. I'd panicked, apologizing profusely, but he'd simply picked up the glass and thrown it in the trash, even though it had been his favorite, a hand-blown crystal piece. The rejection had been so absolute, so visceral. But now Isabel did the same thing and he didn't mind at all. Instead, he looked at her with an indulgence I had never seen, not a trace of rejection in his expression. It was a small, intimate act that screamed volumes. Everyone knew Isabel was Liam's muse. All of his pre-accident works were inspired by her. Every painting whispered his longing and love for her. Before, my understanding of her had only ever come from imagination in those paintings. But now, seeing it for myself, I truly understood just how special she was to him, and just how replaceable I had always been. Adrian's voice pulled me out of the toxic spiral of my thoughts. "Do you want a drink tonight?" I blinked, caught off guard. I was a lightweight, the kind who got drunk after just one glass. Worse, I tended to lose control when I was drunk, saying things I shouldn't, feeling things too deeply. Unless I was with someone I trusted completely, I rarely touched alcohol. "It's my birthday today," Adrian said, watching me. "Oh really?" I smiled apologetically. "Sorry, I didn't know." I glanced around. "Is it just the two of us?" In past years, from what I'd heard, Adrian's birthday parties were extravagant, week-long affairs. But now he just smiled faintly. "Didn't feel like dealing with anyone else. I just wanted to spend it with you." My heart did a funny little skip. It was so rare for anyone to treat me with such straightforward, undivided tenderness. I didn't know how to respond, so I lowered my head and awkwardly murmured, "Okay." As the live band began to sing a soft, soulful ballad, I unknowingly finished my first glass of wine. Adrian gently refilled it for me. I quickly waved him off. "I'm a terrible drinker. Really, I can't handle more." "It's fruit wine. Very low alcohol content," he said. "You're still feeling okay, right?" To be honest, other than feeling a bit warm, my head was surprisingly clear. Remembering that it was his birthday, a gesture that felt profoundly meaningful, I nodded and didn't refuse him again. Suddenly, there was a loud clash of silverware and plates beside me. The abrupt noise startled me and I turned to look right into Liam's angry gaze. He had knocked his fork off the table, his eyes burning into me. "Don't mind him," Adrian said calmly, as if Liam were a misbehaving child. He switched his own plate of perfectly cooked steak with mine. "I heard this Wagyu has flown in from Australia. Supposed to be incredibly tender. Try it." "Oh okay." I pulled myself together and speared a piece of beef, popping it into my mouth. It was sublime, melting on my tongue. The simple pleasure of it was so starkly different from the tension at the next table that I couldn't help but smile at him. "It's delicious." He reached out and ruffled my hair, smiling back. "Glad you like it." Maybe it really was the low alcohol content, because even after 2 glasses I still felt surprisingly clear-headed, just a bit flushed and pleasantly dizzy. My heart, on the other hand, was pounding wildly, a confused rhythm of residual pain, simmering anger, and a new, terrifying attraction. When I looked at Adrian, I noticed my eyes had started to soften, the world around him blurring just a little. The sharp edges of his jaw, the intensity of his green eyes, the way he looked at me as if I were the only person in the room. "I'm going to the restroom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, concern in his eyes. "You're a little tipsy. I'll get a waitress to go with you." I shook my head, placed my napkin back on the table and stood up. But as soon as I did, the room swayed a little. The wine had snuck up on me. "You okay?" Adrian stood and reached out to steady me, his hand firm on my elbow. That's when Liam suddenly appeared behind us. He moved with a predator's grace, slapping Adrian's hand away from my arm. "Don't lay a hand on her," he snarled, his voice low and venomous. The audacity of it stole my breath. Liam, who had rejected my touch for 3 years. Liam, who had another woman's mark on his skin. Liam, who had just shared a glass with his muse, was now claiming ownership over me. "Excuse me," I said, the words sharp as glass. He had always been like this. He wouldn't let any other man near me either. He treated me like a possession, a favorite book he had no interest in reading but didn't want anyone else to touch. I'd known this about him, so I had always been extra cautious around other men, keeping a proper sterile distance. But now we'd already broken up. A quiet, righteous anger stirred in my chest, cutting through the alcohol haze. Still, since we were in a public place, I didn't want to cause a bigger scene to give him and his friends more ammunition. "Let's ask the waiter to move us to another table," Adrian said gently, his eyes on Liam but his voice directed at me. Compared to Liam's volatile temper, Adrian was a pillar of rational calm. Liam's eyes flickered with disbelief. He clearly hadn't expected me to side with Adrian, to embarrass him like that in front of everyone. I ignored him, the finality of it feeling like a superpower. I turned away, my head held high, and headed straight for the restroom, leaving the two men in a silent, tense standoff. By the time I returned, the server had already relocated our table to a quiet, secluded corner by the wall, far from the toxic energy of Liam's group. "I'm sorry," I told Adrian softly as I sat down. "Not only did I not bring you a gift, I even messed up the mood of your birthday dinner." He smiled and nodded toward something behind me. "I don't think you ruined the mood." I followed his gaze and realized Liam had been staring at me the whole time, his eyes cold and dark, a storm barely contained. He looked unhinged. Adrian curved his lips into a faint, challenging smile. "Let me show you something interesting." Before I could process his words, he leaned forward, one hand resting on the table for balance, and gently pressed a kiss against my lips. It was brief, chaste even, but it was a shock to my system, a jolt of pure, undiluted sensation. Through the slightly chaotic background music, I heard Liam curse loudly before storming over. He grabbed Adrian by the collar and punched him hard across the face. "Who the hell gave you permission to kiss her?" Liam roared, his composure shattered. Chaos erupted. Adrian, without a moment's hesitation, grabbed Liam's collar in return and punched him right back. The restaurant manager and several waiters rushed over, desperately trying to pull them apart. I immediately stepped between them, shielding Adrian. Blood was already visible at the corner of his mouth, and his cheek was starting to swell. Seeing me protect Adrian only enraged Liam more. He raised his fist again, his eyes wild. "If you touch him again, I swear I'll call the police," I shouted, my voice cutting through the noise. Liam clenched his jaw, his chest heaving. "You care about him now, huh?" I'd had enough. I didn't care how many people were watching. I was done pretending, done being his placid, understanding shadow. "We already broke up, Liam. If you're going to lose your mind, at least do it with some boundaries." He glared at me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Isabel came over and tugged on his arm, her face pale and flustered. "Liam, let's go," she said softly, trying to calm him down. There was unmistakable guilt in her expression as she tried to keep his temper in check. I helped Adrian out of the restaurant, leaving the wreckage of the dinner behind. Behind us, Liam spat out one last cruel remark, his voice dripping with contempt. "What's so great about a blind man anyway?" His words were harsh and awful, designed to wound Adrian where he was most vulnerable. But I just turned my head and replied with a calm I didn't know I possessed. "He suits me better." I saw Liam's expression darken completely, a mask of pure fury and something that looked startlingly like hurt. I stopped at a nearby pharmacy and bought some bandages and antiseptic. In the quiet of his car, I helped Adrian clean up his injuries. The intimacy of it, dabbing at his split lip under the dim glow of the streetlights, felt more real than any moment I'd ever shared with Liam. "Does it hurt?" I asked, holding an ice pack to his swollen cheek. He nodded, wincing slightly. "Serves you right," I muttered, but there was no heat in it. I looked at his mouth, the memory of the kiss flashing back. "That was your first kiss," I added, glaring at him half-heartedly. He pursed his lips and stayed quiet, but then suddenly grinned, looking ridiculously proud of himself despite the bruising. "Totally worth the punch," he said. I tossed the ice pack into his lap, a mix of exasperation and fondness swirling inside me. "Doesn't seem like you're in that much pain." I opened the car door. "It's late. I should head home." He quickly reached out to grab my hand. The motion pulled on the corner of his lip and made him wince. "Don't be mad," he pleaded, his voice softening. I know I messed up. His hand wrapped around mine, his thumb stroking my knuckles gently. There's still 2 hours until midnight. I haven't had any cake yet. Looking at him like that, with his disheveled hair, bruised face and pleading eyes, reminded me of how he was 3 years ago, after we'd grown close during his blindness. He had shed that cold, aloof shell, and whenever he was upset or had made a mistake, he'd come to me just like this, soft and awkward, trying to make it right. Moments like this made him feel strangely familiar. Closer somehow. All right, I sighed, a real smile finally breaking through. I'll go buy you a cake. He smiled. Okay. After we bought the cake, a simple, elegant dark chocolate ganache, Adrian didn't suggest taking me home. Instead, he looked at me, the city lights reflecting in his still slightly cloudy eyes. Do you want to go back and see the place where you used to take care of me? His suggestion caught me off guard. The apartment where he'd convalesced after his accident was a place I associated with pain, frustration, and darkness. I thought he'd hate it, considering how many painful memories it must have held for him. But I nodded, curiosity and a strange sense of nostalgia pulling me forward. To my surprise, when he unlocked the door, the apartment was spotless. It wasn't the sterile, sanitized clean of a showroom, but a lived-in, cared-for space. The furniture was the same, but everything was meticulously organized. The air smelled of lemon polish and fresh linen, not of medicine and despair. Wow, I murmured, stepping inside. It's different. I had it redone after, he said quietly, locking the door behind us. He set the cake down on the kitchen island and then, without preamble, led me straight down the hall to one of the bedrooms. I kept one thing the same. He opened the door and my chest tightened, a sudden fierce ache of memory stealing my breath. Inside were rows and rows of Winnie the Pooh plush toys. They were neatly arranged on the bed, lined up on the shelves, covering the desk, a sea of yellow fur and red shirts. It was a sight so incongruous with the man standing beside me, with his sharp suits and sharper business acumen, that I could only stare. I kept them all, he said, his voice soft. After his accident, Adrian had suffered temporary blindness due to cerebral hemorrhaging that pressed against his optic nerve. The doctors told us it would take 3 to 5 months for the brain to absorb the blood. If his vision didn't return by then, the damage could be permanent. In the beginning, Adrian couldn't adjust to the darkness. He became a hurricane of irritability. He'd sweep everything off the shelves, refuse to eat, refuse to sit in a wheelchair. He'd rather stumble around the room and bruise himself all over than let me help him. He went through 3 or 4 caregivers before me. I was the only one who stayed. I stayed because I didn't feel safe leaving him alone in the bathroom. I would stand with my back turned just outside the door, listening closely for any sound of him falling. One time, while he was getting dressed, he accidentally dropped his towel. As he bent down to pick it up, he hit his head on the edge of the sink and let out a sharp cry of pain. I immediately turned around to check on him and saw something I definitely wasn't supposed to see. My face flushed red with embarrassment, my blood surging with a heat that shamed me. He ended up giving up on dressing himself and asked me to help him instead. I'd never been that physically close to a young man before. Completely flustered, I blushed furiously as I helped him pull his pants on, my fingers fumbling with the button. What are you shaking for? He had snapped, his voice a defensive growl. Never seen a guy before? At that point, I'd already grown used to his sarcastic jabs. I didn't take it personally, especially not when I was getting paid. Besides, I'd thought with a startling clarity he actually had a really nice body. Over time, I noticed he kept a single worn Winnie the Pooh plush toy on his nightstand. He treated it with great care and wouldn't let anyone else touch it. For someone with such a bad temper, it was a surprisingly childlike, vulnerable detail. One day, emboldened by a rare moment of quiet, I asked him about it without thinking. I assumed he'd respond with his usual disdain and tell me to mind my own business. But instead he went quiet for a moment, his fingers tracing the toy's stitched smile. When I was 8, he said, his voice losing its usual edge, my mom gave me that toy and told me she'd recorded her voice inside. She said whenever I missed her, I could press the button and she'd come back soon. He paused, the memory a heavy weight in the room. But after the toy broke and stopped playing her voice, she never came back. It wasn't until much later he told me that he found out she'd had a heart condition. She'd left to get surgery, but the operation had failed. Do you know why I kept you and no one else? He asked me once during a better moment. I blinked. Why? A faint, sad smile had tugged at the corner of his mouth. Because your voice reminded me of hers. It was the first time he'd ever admitted to needing me, to there being a reason beyond my stubbornness for my presence. To help pull him out of that dark place, I did something completely out of a Korean drama. I bought him one small teddy bear every day. Inside each one, I recorded a message of encouragement. I told him, once you collect 100 bears, you'll be able to see again. When I gave him the first one, he immediately rolled his eyes, his face a mask of contempt. What is this? You think you're in some rom-com? I was a little embarrassed. I'd paid for all of them with my own meager salary. If they work, I'd retorted, you'll have to pay me back. He held the bear in his hands, his head lowered, his fingers tracing its soft fur. After a long while, he let out a quiet, defeated laugh. Fine. Unfortunately, even after 3 months, Adrian still hadn't regained his vision. He went to the hospital for a checkup, and the doctor said his optic nerve had begun to atrophy slightly. Recovery would take longer than expected. But this time he took the news with a grim calm. He quietly let me wheel him out of the hospital. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by a weary resignation that was somehow worse. It wasn't until a year later, on a rainy afternoon, that everything changed. I'd gone out to buy groceries when the downpour started. Worried about leaving Adrian home alone for too long, I tried to rush back, but for the longest time no ride-sharing app would accept my request. I was drenched and frantic when a cab finally pulled over. I climbed into the back seat only to realize someone was already there. And that someone was Liam Miller. He was a renowned painter who'd gained fame at a young age, with looks that could rival any idol and a huge fan base of female followers online. The driver chuckled and said, "This handsome guy couldn't bear to see you getting soaked in the rain, so he asked me to come pick you up." I was completely stunned and quickly thanked Liam over and over, but aside from glancing at me once when I got in, he didn't say a single word. He just stared out the window at the rain-smeared city. Later, our car was rear-ended by a truck. We were both injured. In a moment of instinct I still didn't understand, Liam used his right hand to shield my face from the shattered glass. It speared straight through his palm. That accident tied our lives together in a way neither of us had planned. It wasn't until much later that I found out the only reason Liam had sent the cab for me that day was because I happened to look a lot like Isabel Vance with the outfit I was wearing. A simple trench coat and hat. Maybe 60 or 70% similar. I was just a shadow, a stand-in for the woman he truly loved even then. After the accident, I took time off from my job with Adrian, but I didn't tell him about the injury. I didn't want him to worry. Sometime later, after I'd already started helping Liam, I got a call from Adrian. His voice was filled with an emotion so raw it was almost painful to hear. "Elena, I can see now." I was in Liam's studio, surrounded by the scent of turpentine and his oppressive silence. "That's amazing," I said, and I meant it. The genuine happiness I felt for him was a bright, clean spot in the confusing fog of my life with Liam. He asked where I was. He wanted to come see me. I hesitated, my eyes drifting to Liam, who was staring at a blank canvas, his bandaged hand resting uselessly in his lap. A wave of guilt, duty, and something else. A twisted sense of obligation washed over me. "Now that you've regained your sight," I said, the words feeling like a betrayal, "I guess my job doesn't have much meaning anymore." I was actually planning to resign. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear his heart sinking. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice soft. I took a shaky breath. "Do you know Liam Miller? He's a painter. Not long ago we were in a car accident. He hurt his right hand protecting me. He needs someone to take care of him." The silence that followed was absolute, a void that swallowed all sound. When he spoke again, his voice was flat, stripped of all the earlier emotion. "If you don't have time to meet, we can talk over the phone." Then he exhaled lightly, a sound of finality. "I like you." I froze. The words were so simple, so direct. They were everything I might have wanted to hear just a few months prior. It took a long time, my own heart hammering in my ears, before I could force out a response. But I already promised to be his girlfriend. And just like that, with a few clumsy, guilt-ridden sentences, we missed our chance. I hung up the phone and buried the memory along with the sound of his voice, deep down where I wouldn't have to feel the loss. Now, standing in this room full of silent, watching teddy bears, that lost chance felt like a physical presence. After you left, Adrian said, picking up one of the bears I'd given him, these little bears kept me company through a lot of boring nights. He flicked the switch on its back. The bear raised its tiny arms and a tinny, slightly distorted version of my voice, faint and awkward, filled the room. Adrian, you're an amazing person. Believe in yourself. You can do it. I instinctively curled my toes in embarrassment, a flush creeping up my neck. Oh God. You kept those. Every time I heard it, he said, smiling, I could picture you recording it with that awkward, flustered expression on your face. He looked so fond, so unguarded that I couldn't help but smile too, the embarrassment melting away into a warm glow. Isn't it because my encouragement was warm and touching? I teased. He didn't deny it. Yeah. He put the bear down and turned to face me fully, his expression turning serious. Elena, there's something warm about you. He took a step closer. That's what draws people like me to you. He leaned in and hugged me gently, his arms wrapping around me, his chin resting on the top of my head. He let out a quiet sigh, as if releasing a breath he'd been holding for 3 years. During those darkest, most painful nights, it was thoughts of you that gave me the courage to open my eyes each morning. His words seeped into the broken parts of me, a balm on wounds I'd thought were permanent. He pulled back just enough to look down at me, his green eyes searching mine. I really regret not telling you how I felt back then, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Elena, I've waited 3 years. Can you give me a chance? Maybe it was the lingering buzz of the wine. Or maybe it was his words, the sheer, staggering weight of his patience and his pain, that stirred something deep and dormant inside me. Under the soft lighting of the room, his features looked even gentler, and his eyes held a tenderness I hadn't noticed before, a world away from Liam's cold indifference. All the rejection, the feeling of being second best, the years of touch-starved loneliness, it all crested in that moment. I tiptoed, my heart in my throat, and gave him a soft, tentative kiss on the lips. He froze, his entire body going still. Then I looked up at him, a little hurt by his lack of response. See? I whispered, my voice small. Kissing me isn't that terrible, is it? It was a cheap shot, a reference to the wound Liam had inflicted. Liam had pushed me away for 3 years. Yet the day Isabel came back, he slept with her. Just because I didn't show it didn't mean it didn't hurt. That pain was a live wire and I had just touched it. Adrian's eyes darkened. My words hadn't pushed him away, they had broken the last of his restraint. He pulled me into a tight embrace, answering my question not with words but with his body. His kiss was eager and slightly clumsy, full of a desperate pent-up hunger. It was overwhelming, a little messy, and he seemed more overwhelmed than I was, as if he were drowning in the sensation and never wanted to come up for air. It was nothing like I had imagined. It was real. It was messy. And for the first time it was wanted. The Japanese master agreed. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, its stark, formal text sending a jolt of pure, undiluted triumph through my entire body. After weeks of relentless work, of flying to his city, of pouring every ounce of my sincerity into our meeting, from my deep understanding of his art to my admiration for his philosophy, he had officially granted us the exclusive licensing rights for his work in China. It was an unprecedented coup. I was over the moon. I wanted to celebrate, to mark this turning point not just for the gallery but for myself. I took extra time getting ready that evening, even putting on a dress I rarely wore. A deep emerald silk that draped and flowed, making me feel powerful and seen. The neckline dipped a little low, maybe too low. I hesitated in front of the mirror, my fingers tracing the fabric, but a new, defiant part of me thought Adrian would probably like it. I couldn't bring myself to take it off. When I opened my apartment door and stood in front of Adrian, who had come to pick me up, I instinctively crossed my arms over my chest, a little self-conscious. A flicker of pure, unguarded amazement passed through his eyes, and I felt secretly, fiercely pleased. But then his gaze did a quick, assessing sweep of me, and his brows tightened slightly. My confidence wavered. I slowly lowered my hands, my ears burning. "You're really planning to wear that?" he asked, his voice flat. The warmth in my chest instantly cooled. "Is there something wrong with it?" His face grew even more serious. "Of course there is." I glanced down at myself, the beautiful silk now feeling like a costume. Judging by his reaction, he must have thought I looked inappropriate, cheap even. I suddenly felt deflated, the old insecurities rushing back. Was I trying too hard? Was it too much? No man wants his girlfriend dressed like that to go meet someone else, he muttered almost to himself, his jaw clenched. The misunderstanding was so vast it was almost funny. I wasn't planning to meet anyone else, I replied softly, my heart aching with a strange disappointment. Adrian froze for a second, his stern expression faltering. Aren't you going to Liam's birthday party? Understanding dawned, and with it a wave of affection. He wasn't being controlling, he was being protective, jealous in his own clumsy way. So that's why you were upset, I said, a small smile touching my lips. I'm not going to his party. I looked him directly in the eyes. The Japanese master agreed. He's even coming in person. I saw his expression shift, the tension draining from his shoulders. Adrian had once told me that if that master showed up himself, the exhibition was already half a success. I'm really happy, I said, stepping closer, and grateful for everything you've done to help. I reached out and touched his arm. That's why I made a reservation at that fine restaurant you like. So I could treat you to a proper dinner. His ears turned a faint, telltale red. Oh, he said, the single word laden with chagrin and relief. I misunderstood then. So will you come? I asked, my smile widening. His gaze slowly swept over me again, but this time it was different. It was heated, appreciative, possessive. The air in the hallway seemed to get warmer, thicker. Anyway, we should go, I said, suddenly flustered by the intensity of his look. I turned to walk toward the elevator, but he reached out and stopped me, his hand warm on my wrist. There's no need for a fancy restaurant, he said, his voice low and a little hoarse. He pulled me gently back toward my apartment door. Right now, I'm more interested in something else. For 3 years with Liam, even the brush of our fingertips had been considered too intimate. His rejection had been a constant, cold presence in my life. But now Adrian kissed me. His lips were warm and slightly trembling, a contrast to the sure, almost desperate way he'd kissed me in the teddy bear room. This was different. This was slow, deliberate, acclaiming. It was unfamiliar, terrifying, and exhilarating. The air felt sticky with anticipation. My eyes blurred with heat and I couldn't see clearly. I felt embarrassed, ashamed even of my own inexperience, of the sheer want coursing through me. I didn't want him to look at me like this, so exposed, so vulnerable. My phone, forgotten in my clutch purse on the entryway table, buzzed again and again, a persistent, angry insect. I couldn't be bothered to check it. The calls kept coming, relentless. Liam's name, no doubt. The ghost at the feast. Finally, Adrian broke the kiss, his breathing ragged. He picked up the phone, glanced at the screen for a second, and with a look of pure annoyance, hit the decline button before tossing it onto the sofa. It landed with a soft thud. That didn't count, he said, his expression suddenly turning grim, as if the interruption had reminded him of a world outside this room. He was looking at me, at the dress, at the moment, and finding it all tainted by the phantom of my past. My heart clenched. I moved forward and hugged him, my cheeks flushed red. I buried my face in his chest and whispered, the words a secret confession, "It's okay, Adrian. It was my first time too." From the other end of the line, now silent on the couch, there was a sharp, distant crashing noise, followed by the sound of someone breathing heavily, furious. The call had gone to voicemail and Liam was listening. "If you lay a finger on her, I'll kill you." Liam's voice was a distorted, venomous snarl from the phone's speaker. Adrian ended the voicemail without hesitation and went back to kissing me, his movements more urgent now, as if to erase the sound of Liam's voice from both our minds. He was done waiting. And for the first time so was I. It wasn't until the next day around noon that I finally woke from a sleep of sheer exhaustion. Sunlight streamed through the gaps in my blinds, painting stripes across the tangled sheets. The space beside me was warm but empty. When I turned my phone back on, I saw that Liam had called me over 100 times. Bits and pieces of last night came back to me. The look in Adrian's eyes, the feel of his hands, the sound of Liam's rage captured in digital silence. He must have heard everything. But the thought, which should have filled me with panic, now only brought a dull, distant throb of pity. I didn't care anymore. I dragged myself out of bed, wrapping myself in a robe, and found Adrian in the kitchen making porridge. The sunlight hit his face just right, outlining his sharp features and the faint bruise still visible on his cheek from the restaurant fight. He looked stunning, domestic, and entirely out of place in my small, simple kitchen. I padded over barefoot and leaned gently against him, resting my head on his back. Unable to stop myself, I asked the question that had been hovering in the back of my mind since the intimacy of the night before. At your age, I began, my voice still sleep rough, shouldn't you be, you know? He stilled, the spoon pausing in the pot. He clearly understood what I was getting at. He awkwardly looked away, focusing intently on the simmering porridge. You once said you didn't like things that had been touched by others, I whispered, my heart clenching as I wrapped my arms around his waist from behind. This fool. He really had waited. For 3 years he had waited for me. The realization was a weight, beautiful and terrifying. He had preserved himself not out of fastidiousness, but out of a hope so fragile he probably never dared to speak it aloud. After a quiet breakfast, a comfortable silence settled between us, filled with unspoken understandings. I tidied up a bit and got ready to head to my old apartment to grab a few more of my things. I was finally ready to close that chapter for good. But I didn't expect to run into Liam right outside my door. He must have waited the whole night. He was slumped against the wall, his clothes rumpled. There were dark circles under his eyes, and he looked exhausted and disheveled, a fallen king. His precious hands were a mess. His knuckles were raw and bruised, his fingers stained with dried blood. A dark, unsettling pool of it had congealed on the tiled floor beside him. He glanced past me, saw Adrian standing in the doorway behind me, and then his eyes, bloodshot and desperate, locked onto mine. His gaze dropped to my neck, to the faint, telltale marks left there, and his entire being seemed to dim. The injured hand trembled slightly. Did you too, last night? He asked, his voice a ragged scrape. Yeah, Adrian said, his arms snaking around my shoulders in a gesture of pure, unapologetic possession. His voice was low, almost languid, like a man still savoring a perfect meal. Elena, he added, and I heard the dark male satisfaction in his tone. She's really soft. I saw the flicker of violence in Liam's eyes, a storm about to break. Adrian, clearly not done, leaned in and kissed my temple affectionately. I should thank you. Really? You made her live like a widow for 3 years, and yet her first kiss was still mine. Liam's forehead twitched, his eyes going completely bloodshot. Say that again. I dare you. Before I could react, before I could even form a word to defuse the situation, Liam had already launched himself forward, his injured fist connecting with Adrian's jaw with a sickening crack. What's the big deal? Adrian said, blood already pooling at the corner of his lips, yet still managing a crooked, triumphant smile. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Kissing wasn't all we did. We've done a lot more than that. His words were deliberately, viciously provocative, and every one was a direct slap to Liam's pride, to his twisted sense of ownership. He was so nervous he couldn't even open his eyes, Adrian continued, his voice cold and sharp as a blade. The slightest touch made him shake. But none of that matters anymore. Liam lost it completely. The two of them became a whirlwind of fists and fury, a brutal, primal dance in the confined space of my hallway. I tried to scream, to break them up, but it was useless. They were beyond reason. In the end, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial, I had no choice but to call the police. Only when the officers arrived did the fight finally stop. Adrian's eye was bruised and he was panting heavily, but there was a grim, unassailable pride written all over his face. You can't compare to me, he spat at Liam, who was being restrained by an officer. Elena's a clean freak. She's never had another man but you. He glanced at Liam with utter contempt. You're disgusting. Liam turned a deathly pale, the words hitting him with more force than any punch. I gave my statement to the police, my voice surprisingly steady as I made it clear that Liam had thrown the first punch and Adrian had acted purely in self-defense. In the end, Liam was taken into custody for 7 days for assault. Adrian was hurt pretty badly, but his mood was oddly upbeat as I cleaned his new wounds back in my apartment. At least Liam has decent taste, he joked, wincing as I dabbed antiseptic on his split lip. That was actually something Liam had said bitterly the last time they exchanged punches at the restaurant. I sighed, a wave of exhaustion washing over me. It was hard to know if I should laugh or cry. At least there was still time before the exhibition opened, I murmured. Otherwise, if you showed up to the media looking like this, the internet gossip would never stop. A few days later, as I was finalizing the layout for the exhibition, my phone rang. A number I knew by heart. I hesitated, then answered. You're out? I asked, my voice carefully neutral. He paused for a moment and I could hear the silence on his end, heavy with everything unsaid. "The painting I gave you," he finally said, his voice strained. "It has issues. It needs to be revised." "You mean Evening Dew?" "The portrait of Isabel." "Yeah, but that was from 5 years ago. Are you sure it's necessary to change it now?" I took a shallow breath, falling back into professional mode. "I'll have my assistant send it over." "No," he replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll come to your gallery." Liam showed up at Viridian Perspectives not long after. His face was still a mosaic of fading bruises, his right hand wrapped in clean white gauze. He looked noticeably thinner, the sharp lines of his cheekbones and jaw standing out in stark relief. The aura of invincible genius he'd always carried was gone, replaced by a brittle, raw energy. I led him to my office, where an easel and a set of fresh paints had been prepared, just as he'd requested. The portrait of Isabel, Evening Dew, was already mounted, her serene, rain-soaked gaze filling the space. "Take your time," I told him, my voice cool and professional. "No one will disturb you." I turned to leave, to give him the solitude he had always demanded while working. "Elena." His voice stopped me. I turned back to find him standing close, too close. Before I could react, he reached out and grabbed my wrist. I froze. He almost never touched me before. In the past, he avoided all physical contact with women except for Isabel. His skin was warm, his grip firm. A jolt, not of electricity but of pure, unadulterated revulsion, shot up my arm. I tried to pull away, but he held on tight, his fingers like a vice. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. He took a step forward, using his body to corner me against the closed office door. His eyes were tinged with red, the pupils dilated as though he was barely holding something monstrous back. The scent of him, turpentine, expensive cologne, and something uniquely Liam, overwhelmed me, a sensory trigger to a past life. He lowered his head, leaned close, and whispered, his breath fanning my face, "Isn't this what you always wanted?" Before I could answer, before I could even process the sheer audacity of his words, his soft lips were on mine. I was caught off guard and didn't dodge in time. He pried open my lips, his tongue slick and forceful, a violent invasion. It was nothing like Adrian's kisses, eager, clumsy, overwhelming in their honesty. This was an act of possession, of desperation. His gaze darkened as one hand slid down to my waist, pulling me flush against him. My tears welled up uncontrollably, hot and shaming. This intimacy, something I had once ached for, now felt nothing but revolting. It was a violation. I bit down hard on his lower lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood. Liam gasped in pain and staggered back, his eyes wide with shock, his hand flying to his bleeding mouth. "Get out," I snapped. I was furious, trembling from head to toe. Insane. There was blood in his mouth, but he swallowed it down with a clenched jaw, his eyes wild. "So he can," he spat, the word dripping with venom, "but I can't. Is that it?" My head spun from the anger, from the violation. "He can do whatever he wants, but you can't," I shot back, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it was almost cleansing. Liam's chest rose and fell violently. He stared at me, a war raging in his eyes, before he slowly said, "What if I told you that nothing ever happened between me and Isabel?" I looked into his eyes, the eyes I had once thought held the secrets of the universe, and saw only a scared, pathetic man clinging to a narrative that had already expired. The truth of it didn't even matter anymore. The betrayal wasn't just about sex. It was about the hickey, the shared glass, the years of emotional neglect, the way he had paraded her in front of me. "It doesn't matter to me," I said, my voice eerily calm. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand. "You're already dirty." I saw the words land, saw them shatter something inside him. He looked destroyed. "Get out of my gallery, Liam. Now." He left without another word, leaving behind the unsettling painting and the ghost of his desperation. A few months later, I received a final piece of news. Liam had left the country. He had donated the entirety of his estate, including the proceeds from The Left Hand, to a foundation for artists with real physical disabilities. He had vanished, leaving behind only his paintings and his ruin. It was the most honest thing he had ever done. I stood in my gallery, watching the afternoon light pour through the skylights, illuminating a new exhibition I was planning. It was about redemption. About the art that comes after the storm. I picked up a pencil and began to sketch, my left hand moving with a confidence that was entirely wonderfully my own. The light in Venice is different. It's a soft liquid gold that dances on the canals and bleaches the ancient stone, a light that has inspired artists for centuries. I stood on the balcony of our rented palazzo, the gentle lapping of water a constant, soothing soundtrack. Below, Adrian was talking animatedly with the director of the Biennale, his hands sketching shapes in the air. My husband. The word still sent a quiet thrill through me. This was our honeymoon, a month-long immersion in art and each other, a world away from the ghosts we had laid to rest. The feature in the art journal had opened doors I hadn't even known existed, culminating in this invitation to consult on a contemporary exhibit for the Biennale's next iteration. It was a dream I'd never allowed myself to dream, one that belonged to other people with different past. Penny for your thoughts? Adrian's voice came from behind me. His arms slipped around my waist, pulling me back against his chest. He smelled of sunshine and the sea. I was just thinking about light, I said, leaning into him. How it changes everything. He rested his chin on my shoulder, following my gaze across the Grand Canal. It does. It reveals what's really there. We stood in comfortable silence for a while. The news of Liam's departure and his massive charitable donation had been the final, surprising coda to that painful symphony. There were no more phone calls, no more paintings delivered like grenades. The silence from that quarter was finally peaceful, absolute. He had excised himself from our story and in doing so had given me the final gift of indifference. Are you ready for tonight? Adrian asked, his voice a low murmur against my ear. Tonight was the opening of a smaller avant-garde gallery show I had helped curate. It was my European debut in a way. Yes. I am, I said, and the certainty in my own voice surprised me. There was no anxiety, no fear of disappointing anyone. There was only the work. My work. The gallery was tucked away in a narrow alley, a stark white cube that contrasted beautifully with the city's ancient decay. The space was packed, a hum of Italian, French, and English filling the air. I moved through the crowd, no longer the nervous ghost on the periphery but the center of the gravitational pull. I explained the thematic connections between the pieces, discussed the artist's intentions, my voice steady and clear. At one point I found myself standing before a particularly striking piece, a sculpture made of reclaimed wood and shattered mirrors, titled Refraction, Refraction. A tall, elegant woman with silver-streaked hair stood beside me. It's powerful, no? She said in lightly accented English. It does not hide its broken pieces. It uses them to create something new, to reflect the world in 1,000 different ways. Exactly, I said, turning to her with a smile. The breaks aren't flaws. They're part of its integrity. She introduced herself as Isabella Rossi, a well-known critic from Milan. We spoke for 20 minutes. A deep, flowing conversation about art, restoration, and the courage it takes to rebuild. It was the kind of conversation I had once only observed from a distance happening to other people. Later, as the crowd began to thin, Adrian found me. His eyes were shining with a pride so intense it was almost a physical force. You were magnificent, he said, his hand finding the small of my back. Isabella Rossi doesn't give her praise lightly. She told me your vision is the most compelling she's seen in a decade. A warmth spread through my chest, a clean, bright feeling of accomplishment. This was mine. Not borrowed, not reflected, but earned. We walked back to the palazzo along the quiet canals, the moon painting a silver path on the water. The sounds of the city were muted, a distant serenade. I have something for you, Adrian said as we entered the grand, high-ceilinged living room. He handed me a flat, rectangular package, beautifully wrapped. Adrian, what is this? You've already given me the world. Just open it. I carefully untied the ribbon and peeled back the paper. It was a painting. A small, exquisite watercolor. It depicted a rainy afternoon, seen through a window. The glass was streaked with droplets, blurring the world outside into soft, impressionistic shapes of gray and green. Inside, sitting at a table, was a young man with his head in his hands. And standing a few feet away, her back to the viewer, was a young woman in a simple, practical dress, her posture a mixture of determination and uncertainty. It was us. In his old apartment. During the darkest days. My breath caught. When did you? I started it a few months after you left, he said softly, coming to stand beside me. I was learning to paint with my left hand too. It was frustrating. For really. But whenever I got too angry I would think of you. Of your voice. Of the stubborn way you refused to let me give up. He pointed to the figure of the woman. I couldn't get your face right. Not from memory. So I painted your presence instead. The space you occupied in that room. It was the most real thing in there. Tears welled in my eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of completion. Liam had painted me as an object, a function, a tool for his own redemption or a mirror for his own guilt. Adrian had painted my presence. My essence. He had seen me, truly seen me, even when he was blind. It's the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me, I whispered, my voice thick with emotion. It's not a masterpiece, he said with a shrug, but his eyes were tender. It is to me, I said, turning to him. Because it's our truth. Our foundation. He kissed me then, a slow, deep kiss that tasted of love and Venice and a future we had built together with our own 4 hands. The next morning I sat at the balcony table with my laptop and a fresh espresso. An email had come in from Isabella Rossi. She was commissioning a series of articles on the new wave of female curators and wanted to lead with me. Attached was a preliminary list of questions. One of them caught my eye. Your personal story of resilience is well known. How does your past inform your curatorial present? I looked out at the sun-dazzled water, at the gondolas gliding past, at Adrian, who was now swimming in the canal below, his strong strokes cutting a clean line through the water. I thought of the studio full of teddy bears, of the feel of a paintbrush in my hand as I guided his, of the cold concrete of a parking garage, of the stark white walls of my own gallery. My past no longer informed my present like a wound. It informed it like a compass. It had taught me how to see, not just art but people. It had taught me the difference between a performance of pain and the quiet dignity of real struggle. It had taught me to value integrity over spectacle and presence over possession. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys with a certainty that felt like coming home. My past taught me that the most powerful art and the most meaningful lives are not those that are perfect and untouched, but those that have been broken and remade. My curatorial vision is to find those pieces, those artists, who have the courage to use their fractures not to hide, but to refract the light. To show the world in a new way. Because the breaking is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new one. The curation of a life, like the curation of art, is an act of continuous, brave and beautiful creation. I signed the email, Elena Vance Wolf, curator. And for the first time, every part of that name felt entirely and wonderfully my own. The end.